Go for the pulls and the pools. Go for the oohs and the ahs. Go for the bubbles and the bubbly. Go for the story and the stories. Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.
What's up, everybody, and welcome in to the Legal Hands to the Face show with Bill Colarulo. A lot to talk about today on the Legal Hands to the Face show. This is a weekly show, so it's been a while since we spoke, or at least it feels like it's been a while, even though it's only been a week for the Legal Hands to the Face show. A lot has happened with this Philadelphia Eagles football team. They had their end-of-the-season press conference with Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman. They've hired two new coordinators in Vic Fangio for the defense, Kellen Moore for the offense. We have to talk about that. And we'll talk a little bit about those championship games yesterday with Kansas City going to another Super Bowl and with the San Francisco 49ers getting so lucky with Dan Campbell's bad decisions, getting them to the Super Bowl. So we're going to talk about it all, but this is the Legal Hands to the Face show. We are live right now. If you're listening to the audio, because we will take the audio and upload it to the Legal Hands to the Face podcast, this is a live show being recorded on Monday night at 6 o'clock. We are live on the Legal Hands to the Face Sports Talk YouTube channel. We are live on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter. We are also being simulcast on the JAKIB Sports Network. So we are everywhere. So go ahead, hit that like button, hit that share button. If you are listening to the audio, do me a big favor, leave a review on the podcast, on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Really will help us reach more Eagles fans, because even though the season is over, there are going to be a lot of questions that need to be answered this offseason, not only with the coaching staff, but a lot of personnel decisions, which we will get into on future shows. And I told you last week on the Legal Hands of the Face show that there was a big announcement coming. Some of you already know. You can now hear me every Saturday and Sunday on 97.5 The Fanatic, doing Fanatic weekends, Saturday and Sunday mornings from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. So you get me on YouTube, you get me on JAKIB Sports, you got me on social media, and now you get me on the radio. So you're not going to get tired of hearing from me, hopefully. But let's get a little roll call from the Legal Hands to the Face crew in the house before we jump in. A lot to talk about. I got Flexin' and Steppin', my man, always here. Doesn't always agree with me, my man, but he's always here representing. Appreciate you. Xavier, Spencer, Crawley, Fran, Twiz, Candace, or Canadian Cat, I should say. And we got some people on TikTok checking in as well. But let's jump in because there is so much to talk about with the new coordinators. But before we do, it feels like it was an eternity ago that the Eagles had their end-of-the-season press conference on Wednesday of last week. A lot of lip service, as we expected. The one thing that did come of it was they asked Howie Roseman who made the decision to move on from Sean Desai with only 4 games left and turn the defense over to Matt Patricia, which I feel and a lot of you feel was the nail in the coffin of this season. That was the final nail in the coffin of this 2023 season. And Howie Roseman said it was Nick Sirianni, that Sirianni came to him just like he did when he wanted to turn play calling duties over to Shane Steichen back in 2021 and said, hey, I'm thinking about making a change. And Howie Roseman supports Sirianni's decisions when it comes to the coaches, just like Sirianni supports Howie Roseman. In my opinion, and I see Flexin' and Steppin' in the chat saying it as well, that was a lie. As Maury Povich would say, the lie detector test determined, well, let me say that again. The lie detector test determined that was a lie. Because there is no doubt in my mind that Howie Roseman was the one that made that fateful decision. No way that was Nick Sirianni. But with all that being said, let's move forward. They also talked about what they were looking for in an offensive coordinator. And I think they hit on everything they were looking for. And as we sit here today, now knowing who the two coordinators are going to be in 2024, I have to tell you, and I said it today on the Philly Sports Power Hour. If you follow me on social media, I posted some videos over the last couple days about this. I feel good about the start of the start of this offseason. I feel good about the direction of this team with these two coordinators. Now, we'll talk about Vic Fangio in a second, but I want to start on the offensive side of the football with Kellen Moore, because there is a lot to like about Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles next year. I only have one problem with it. That's it. Everything else checks every box for me. The only problem I have with Kellen Moore is that if he comes in here this season and has success as the offensive coordinator, he will not be here next year. He will be a head coach next season. If the Eagles do what we're all hoping they do, which have a bounce back year, if Kellen Moore can help this offense not be stale, as Nick Sirianni described it at his end of the season press conference, and if he can help Jalen Hurts get back to the MVP form we saw in 2022, Kellen Moore won't be here in 2025. And I'm starting to accept that, because who I wanted as offensive coordinator was Frank Reich. And the reason I wanted Frank Reich was because he wasn't going to leave to be a head coach if they had success. I didn't want us to have to do this all over again next offseason and make Jalen then have his 8th coordinator in 9 years, dating back to college. But I'm starting to accept it. I'm starting to think to myself, maybe that's just a price to pay if we're going to have a really good season this year on offense. Because if Kellen Moore gets a head coaching job somewhere, that means the Eagles had a pretty damn good year. So maybe we should just accept that reality. But let me tell you why you should feel good about this hire. Why you should feel good about Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles, because this checks a lot of boxes. A lot of you know the name Kellen Moore. You know he was the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys a couple years ago. But just a quick background. He was a quarterback at the NFL level. He was a quarterback with the Detroit Lions from 2012 to 2014. He was a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys from 2015 to 2017. Backup quarterback. He retired before the 2018 season to join the coaching staff because it was obvious very early that this guy was going to be a good coach. And in 2018, he became the quarterback's coach for Dallas. And then he became the offensive coordinator. And although Kellen Moore is only 35 years old right now, he's going to be 36 when the season starts. He has 5 years as an offensive coordinator calling plays in the NFL. That is huge for this team. Because going into 2023, Brian Johnson had never called plays at the NFL level, and I think it showed all season. Maybe Brian Johnson grows into a very good coordinator in this league. He wasn't ready. You watched the games. You saw the lack of rhythm this offense had. You scratched your head sometimes with these play calls. Well, now you're getting a coordinator who's called plays for 5 years, and guess what? Had a ton of success doing it. Let's look at his last 2 years in Dallas. I know some people want to look at 2020. Dak blew out his ankle in 2020. You remember that horrific injury, that compound fracture to his ankle? That happened in 2020. Dak only played 4 games that year. So let's look at 2021 and 2022. Kellen Moore's offense in 2021, and I'm going to give you the overall numbers, but then I want to go more granular. I want to get into a little bit more detail of why I like this hire and why you guys should like this hire as well. But let's just look at the overall numbers for a second. Kellen Moore called the plays on that 2021 Dallas Cowboys team that was the number 1 offense in the NFL. Number 1 in terms of total yards. Number 1 in terms of points per game at 31.2 points per game. Number 1 in the league. They had a top 3 passing offense. And they had a top 10 rushing offense. There's some misconceptions out there that Kellen Moore doesn't like to run the football. And I'm going to show you why that is not accurate. I'm going to show you why that's not, in fact, true. So you look at Kellen Moore in 2021, best offense in the NFL, top 3 passing offense, top 10 rushing offense, top 6 red zone offense. In the NFL, we know how difficult it is once you get inside the 20-yard line. When that field shrinks, when the back of the end zone becomes the 12th defender on the field, you have to be good at designing plays to be able to convert for touchdowns when you get down inside the 20. And in 2021, the Dallas Cowboys had a top 6 red zone. Well, let's look at 2022 because their red zone offense in 2022 was absolutely incredible. They had the best red zone offense in the entire league in 2022, 71% efficiency inside the red zone. If you guys watch the NFL, you know if you can convert for touchdowns instead of field goals in the red zone, you could watch the playoffs and see how many teams were able to move the football, but the drive stalled when they got inside the red zone. Kellen Moore, in his last 2 years in Dallas, his red zone offense was incredible. And even this past season with the LA Chargers, where they didn't have a great offense, they didn't have a great team. Brandon Staley, their head coach, lost his job. They were not very good. They still had a top 12 red zone offense. So I don't understand people who are overly negative about this move. I did my Philly Sports Power Hour show earlier today, and there were a lot of you in the chat angry at this move. And I don't get it. When you look at these numbers and you look at Kellen Moore and you realize that he's called plays before. This is one of the best case scenarios for this Philadelphia Eagles offense. And I told you I was going to get a little bit more granular for you. I'm going to dive into the minutia a little bit. But before we do, there's this misconception out there that Kellen Moore doesn't like to run the football. And a lot of Eagles fans have that idea in their head because they heard Mike McCarthy, after the Dallas Cowboys decided to move on from Kellen Moore, they heard Mike McCarthy say this. He said, Kellen wants to light up the scoreboard, but I want him to run the damn ball more so I can rest my defense. And now every Eagles fan, he doesn't like to run the football. Mike McCarthy said that's why they got rid of him, because he doesn't like to run the football. Mike McCarthy's full of crap, okay? To put it mildly. Because in 2022, when Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys, they ran the ball 531 times. That was 6th most in the entire National Football League. In 2023, the season we just had, with Mike McCarthy, who wants to run the damn ball more, calling plays, they only ran it 468 times, 14th in the NFL. So that's a bunch of crap that Mike McCarthy wanted to move on from Kellen Moore because he wouldn't run the ball enough. He ran the ball a lot more than McCarthy ran it this past season. So you could take that quote and throw it out the window. Now, I know in Los Angeles this past season, Kellen Moore didn't run the ball a lot. But I don't really think that's a good judge of who this kid is. And I call him a kid because he still looks like a kid. He's 35 years old. Because the LA Chargers offensive line stunk. They didn't have a very good team. I think they were 5-12. Justin Herbert only played 13 games. It was a dumpster fire in LA. It's the reason that Brandon Staley got fired. And I said even before this season, I thought Brandon Staley was one of the worst coaches in the NFL. But even with a bad offense in LA, this is what I am most excited about with Kellen Moore. When the Philadelphia Eagles had a really good offense in 2022, one of the things that they did so well, and now we're going to jump into the details. One of the things the Philadelphia Eagles did so well in 2022 was yards after catch. Everybody loves to talk about YAC, yards after catch, so important. Well, in 2022, the Philadelphia Eagles were top 10 in total yards after catch. They were top 5 in average yards after catch per reception. And that offense was humming. And that's play design. That's an ability to get the ball in your playmaker's hands in space. Eagles did it great in 2022. Last year, with Brian Johnson calling the plays and scheming the plays, they went from being top 10 in total, top 5 in average yards after catch per reception, to 25th in the NFL. 25th in the NFL. Now let's take a look at our guy, Kellen Moore. Because even with a bad LA Chargers team, they were top 5 with yards after catch. This guy is going to be able to design plays and scheme plays to get the ball in our playmakers' hands to make plays in space and pick up that yak that we all love. Because you look at the numbers of this Philadelphia Eagles football team last year, it's criminal that they were 25th in the league in yards after catch. With the personnel that they had on the offensive side of the football, with guys like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert and DeAndre Swift, that the Philadelphia Eagles offense couldn't scheme plays to get the ball in their hands in space to pick up yak, to be 25th in the league, criminal. But Kellen Moore, even with the LA Chargers, was top 5. That's one thing to really like about him. Well, let's keep going. What else did the Philadelphia Eagles struggle with this year? Having answers for the blitz. We all can remember Week 18 against the Giants. We all remember what happened in the wild card game against the Tampa Bay Bucks against the blitz. Well, you go back to the 2022 Dallas Cowboys with Kellen Moore, they had the number 1 success rate. Number 1 success rate against the blitz. This is a good hire, guys. Trust me on this. This is a really good hire. And there's more to like about him. One of the things that we all thought was so frustrating about this Philadelphia Eagles offense this year was that when they would come out in their offensive formation, that was the formation they would have when they snapped the football. They hardly ever ran any pre-snap motion. In fact, they were the last ranked team when it came to pre-snap motion. 32 out of 32 NFL teams. Kellen Moore and the LA Chargers were top 8. So you're going to see a lot better play designs. You're going to see a lot better pre-snap motion. You're going to see Jalen Hurts under center a little bit more. I am really excited about this hire. I told you the only negative I have with it is I don't think he's going to be here in 2025. Because I think you're going to see this guy have a lot of success with this offense. Now, there are question marks with the personnel, and we're going to talk about that throughout the offseason. But there are a lot of things to like, and there's even more. I told you about his red zone efficiency. I told you about the yards after catch. I told you about pre-snap motion. I told you he's called plays for a top offense in the NFL. There's also something else he does well that the Philadelphia Eagles really struggled with this season, and that's the RPO. We all loved the run-pass option with Jalen Hurts in 2022, as we should have. Because if you go back and look at 2022, the Philadelphia Eagles averaged over 7.8 yards per RPO play. It was unstoppable. That number dropped to 4.8 this season. And it wasn't because they were calling it less. I dove into the numbers. They called the RPO 10 times a game this past season. They called it 10 times a game in 2022. Didn't feel like that when you were watching the games, but they called it just as much this season as they did last season. The problem was it just wasn't as effective. Well, that's something he can do. In fact, with the Chargers this past year, they ran the third most RPOs, had close to 6 yards of play. In 2022, with the Dallas Cowboys, they had over 7 yards of play on the RPO. So I'm not understanding the negativity surrounding this guy. And I see people say, oh, well, he's a Dallas Cowboy. We don't want a Dallas Cowboy. That's ridiculous. It wasn't that long ago he was considered one of the hottest offensive minds in the league. And I'm giving you the data to support why you should be happy about this. And I got a little upset at the Philly Sports Power Hour earlier today because I had a lot of people in the chat saying, oh, Kellen Moore stinks. I see somebody else now, Keith Bruce. Kellen Moore stinks. Based off of what? Other than the fact that people want to just be negative, other than the fact that we are just angry at this team, which I understand. It was a frustrating end to this season. But outside of just wanting to be negative, what facts or evidence do you have to support that this guy stinks? And I see Slimville Slugger saying, well, can he win? Well, in 2022, as the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, they were 12-5. In 2021, 12-5, NFC East champs. And I think the only reason the Dallas Cowboys got rid of him was because Mike McCarthy wanted to be able to call plays again. I'm excited for this hire, guys, and I really think you should be as well. And I'm still not seeing people say anything that changes my opinion. Everything to me just seems like negativity without any evidence to support it. He checks every single box of what we were looking for an offensive coordinator. And the problem was, and we talked about this before, for the Philadelphia Eagles to go out there and find an offensive coordinator that had experience calling plays, it wasn't going to be easy. You couldn't go to one of these other teams that has an offensive coordinator and try to hire them to be your offensive coordinator, even if you offered them more money. The other team could block a lateral move. So the Philadelphia Eagles had to find someone who was available. And they found a good one. And I'm not understanding why people are being negative. I think he's going to do a lot of good things for this offense. Now, he's never coached a quarterback like Jalen Hurts. I see somebody in the chat. That is accurate. Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, not like Jalen Hurts. But in a lot of ways, I like that. We want some fresh ideas. Yeah, we're going to mix in some of the things that the Eagles did well with Jalen Hurts. We're going to mix in some of the things that they did in 2022. Even last year, they did some good things. Jalen's numbers weren't that far off. Too many turnovers. The big difference from 2022 to 2023 with Jalen Hurts was turnovers. You look at the numbers, similar completion percentage, similar passing yards. 22 passing touchdowns in 22, 23 passing touchdowns in 23. The difference, turnovers. Jalen went from 8 turnovers in 2022 to 20 turnovers in 2023. 6 interceptions to 15. 2 fumbles lost to 5. Those are things that Kellen Moore and this Eagles staff need to fix. So I'm just not understanding the negativity when you just hired an offensive coordinator who has called plays for a number 1 offense in the NFL. You look at the Dallas Cowboys numbers for the 4 years that Kellen Moore was their offensive coordinator and throw out the year Dak Prescott was out for the season. They had one of the best offenses in the league every single season. And one of the things I keep hearing, well, they had a lot of talent. Well, so do the Philadelphia Eagles. You know I have my problems with Howie Roseman, and we're going to talk about the defense after the break because I don't think Howie Roseman gave the defense enough personnel, but he certainly gave the offense enough personnel. There were certainly enough playmakers on the offensive side of the football. And when you look at the 2022 offense compared to the 2023 offense, it wasn't that much different from a personnel perspective. But what was the one major difference? You went from Shane Steichen to Brian Johnson. So I'm really excited and hopeful that Kellen Moore is a great hire for this Philadelphia Eagles football team. And I'm going to give you one more thing. Not sure this is going to matter or not, but hey, any good juju we can get, the better. Every single time the Philadelphia Eagles hire an offensive coordinator from the Chargers, they go to the Super Bowl. Frank Reich, offensive coordinator for the Chargers. They win Super Bowl 52. Shane Steichen, offensive coordinator for the Chargers. They go to Super Bowl 57. Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator for the Chargers. Super Bowl 59 next year? Well, we'll find out. But I like that hire. Keep it coming in the chat, guys. I see you engaging. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I want to jump over to the other side of the football to tell you why I'm also excited about this Vic Fangio hire, and I think you should be as well. Hit that like button, hit that share button. Make sure you're following. Make sure you're subscribed. We'll be right back.
Any professional sports coach will tell you there's no substitution for preparation. At Malamut & Associates, that is a tenet by which we live. We prepare from day one for victory. Anything less is not acceptable.
Go passionately. Go fearlessly. Go confidently.
Go Birds!
Go confidently towards your goals with First Trust, Philly's hometown bank for nearly 90 years, and the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. We're focused on getting you over the goal line. So go with conviction, go with trust,
Go Birds!
and go forward with us by your side. First Trust Bank, the official bank of Philadelphia dreams. Up and go Birds.
Underdog Fantasy has a way for you to play alongside your favorite football team all season long with their Fantasy Pick'em game. You pick between 2 to 5 players, select whether they'll go higher or lower on one of their stats, then do what you usually do on a Sunday. Watch the games. You can win up to 20 times your money in a single game by going 5 for 5. It's a fantasy game, and the Sports Betting Show wants you to get involved. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com. When you sign up, use the promo code WIN, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. That's UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN.
EAGLES, Eagles.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back into the Legal Hands to the Face show with Bill Colarulo. Good to spend some time with the Legal Hands crew tonight. This is a weekly show. We're live every Monday night. We may switch that up. I'll keep you guys posted now that the offseason's here. Monday used to work really well because the games were on Sunday. We could react to the games, but we'll see now that the offseason's here. But we're reacting to the two big news hires, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. Just spent the first segment talking about Kellen Moore and why I like that hire. Now we're going to jump over to the defensive side of the football because I think this is another good hire. And I'm not being positive just for the sake of being positive. Just like I don't want you guys to be negative just for the sake of being negative, I'm looking at the stats, at the facts, at the evidence, at the history of what we now have as our coordinators. And how do you not feel better today than you did when the season ended? The Philadelphia Eagles just leveled up. They just went from Brian Johnson, who had never been an offensive coordinator in this league, who had never called plays in this league, to a guy who has called plays for 5 seasons. Called plays for an offense that had been number 1 in the NFL. And you look at the defensive side of the football, you're going from Sean Desai / Matt Patricia to Vic Fangio, who has been in the NFL for 33 years. And when we talked about what we wanted in a defensive coordinator, I wanted a veteran. I wanted a guy who was going to be able to come in here and immediately have the respect of the players, immediately have the respect of all these young guys, and be a no-nonsense type of coach. And that's exactly what you heard about Vic Fangio. He has a reputation for being a strict coach, a fierce disciplinarian. Now, we can debate whether or not you guys love the Fangio scheme, but we know the Eagles like that scheme. So if they're going to run the Fangio scheme, bring in the guy who created the damn scheme in Vic Fangio. And there are so many things to like about this hire, guys. And I'm going to go through them. Just like I gave you all the reasons to be happy about the Kellen Moore hire, listen to some of these reasons to be happy about the Vic Fangio hire. First of all, like I said, he's been a coach in this league for 33 years. He's been a defensive coordinator for 20 seasons. And maybe just as important as that, he was a linebackers coach for a decade. Do you think this Philadelphia Eagles team needs some help at linebacker? Do you think maybe a guy with that much clout that Vic Fangio has is going to accept the philosophy of Howie Roseman to ignore the linebacker position? I don't. I think Fangio is going to be able to say to Howie Roseman, you want me to run this defense, you want me to run this scheme, you're going to give me the players I want. So I expect the Eagles to have better linebackers on this roster next season. I expect the Eagles to maybe have a better safety on this roster next season because you need those things in a Vic Fangio offense. But I want to talk about some other things that I like about this guy. But when I talk about clout, and before we get into some of these things here, when I talk about clout, Fangio is going to be able to bring in higher caliber position coaches When you're in the league for as long as Vic Fangio has been in this league, and you are respected as much as Fangio is respected in this league, you got a great coaching tree that you could pull from. We already now know, it was reported right before the show, they're hiring Clint Hurt to be the defensive line coach. Something this team could really use is a good D-line coach. He was the Seattle Seahawks defensive coordinator for 2 seasons. He was the Seattle assistant head coach. He was their D-line coach for 5 seasons. And we already know that the Eagles have spoken to Joe Barry, former defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers, about potentially being a linebackers coach. They talked to Mike Caldwell, former defensive coordinator of the Jacksonville Jaguars, about being a linebackers coach. This guy's going to bring in better position coaches. And there's a lot to like about him. That reputation of being a strict and fierce disciplinarian. Earlier in the week, an agent we know all too well in this town, Drew Rosenhaus, who we all remember when T.O. was doing sit-ups on his driveway. Drew Rosenhaus came out and said there were quite a few players on the Miami Dolphins team that didn't necessarily get along with Fangio. It wasn't a great relationship with many of the players. There were some guys that loved him, but there was quite a few that didn't. It definitely wasn't a unanimous positive relationship. Well, at first blush, you may be, man, that's concerning. Well, first of all, everything that Drew Rosenhaus says, take with a grain of salt, because he doesn't say anything that doesn't benefit Drew Rosenhaus and his clients. But interestingly, Dante Whitner, who played for Vic Fangio during the time when Vic was the defensive coordinator in San Francisco, was on NBC Sports Philly with Barrett Brooks. And Barrett asked him about that. The things that this guy said about Vic Fangio have me even more excited about the hire. Just listen to some of these quotes that Dante Whitner gave to Barrett Brooks on NBC Sports Philly. When I got to San Francisco from Buffalo, it was like a whole different world. When I got to San Francisco under the tutelage of Ed Donatel and Vic Fangio, my football IQ went through the roof. He's the most intelligent teacher I've ever encountered my entire time in the NFL. He's talking about Vic Fangio. I say teacher because he does things that are unorthodox in his coaching style. So then Barrett Brooks asked him, well, what's going on in Miami then? Drew Rosenhaus said not all of these guys loved him. Listen to this and tell me this isn't going to get you excited about the hire of Vic Fangio as your DC. Dante Whitner, those guys aren't serious about football. Because if you take everything that he teaches you, all the small details, and you absorb that information and you put it back on the football field, you're going to be an excellent football player. What he's going to bring to that defense is empowerment. You're not going to be stagnant in anything you do. He's going to give the players on the field, based on the formations that they see, the ability to be able to check out of the play call. You're going to be coached up so well in the secondary, you're going to know exactly what route concepts are coming and what looks to give the quarterback to get him off his primary routes. Guys, I'm excited about this. And you go back to an interview, 2019, 3 of the best offensive minds in the NFL, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, were all asked, which defense is the most difficult to read and attack? All 3 of them said Vic Fangio. I know we want a defense that is more aggressive. I know we want a defense that blitzes more. You constantly hear that, especially in the city of Philadelphia. We want to blitz. We want to blitz. We want to blitz. Being aggressive and blitzing are 2 different things. And blitzing in today's NFL doesn't work. And I don't mean that you shouldn't blitz at all. Blitzing at the right times can work effectively. We saw it in the championship games. And I want to talk about that before the show's over, some of these championship games and the decisions that Dan Campbell made. And we'll talk a little Andy Reid. Blitzing at the right time can be effective, but blitzing just for the sake of blitzing doesn't work in the NFL. And when we talk about being aggressive, I think everybody here would agree with me. The San Francisco 49ers have an aggressive defense. The Baltimore Ravens have an aggressive defense. The New York Jets under Rob Saleh have an aggressive defense. Do you know all three of those teams are in the bottom of the NFL when it comes to blitz rate? You can be aggressive without blitzing. The San Francisco 49ers, 30th in the NFL when it comes to blitzing. The Baltimore Ravens, 25th in the NFL. The New York Jets, 31st in the NFL. And last year, the Miami Dolphins, under Vic Fangio, 27th in the NFL in terms of blitz rate. Top 3 in terms of sacks. You don't have to blitz a lot. And I know a lot of people got excited when they heard Wink Martindale is going to get spoken to by the Eagles about maybe being the next defensive coordinator. Oh, we want Wink Martindale. He blitzes. Oh, he's great. Wink Martindale's defenses stink in today's NFL. Take a look at Wink Martindale from this past season. Number 2 in the NFL in terms of blitz rate. He was 27th in yards against, 29th in sacks, 29th in rushing defense, 26th in points against, 19th in passing yards against. That's who you want running your defense just because he blitzes? Oh, well, he blitzes. It doesn't work when you blitz that much in today's NFL. You can have success and you can be aggressive without blitzing that much. So I'm excited about this Vic Fangio move. I really am. And I think you guys should be as well. We needed a defensive coordinator with experience. We needed a defensive coordinator who has a reputation for being a disciplinarian. Because what we saw at the end of that season from our Philadelphia Eagles with the way they tackled was embarrassing. I don't think you're going to see that. I don't think you're going to see that from a Vic Fangio coached defense. So we will see what happens, guys, but I don't think that we should be negative just for the sake of being negative with this Philadelphia Eagles team, because as upset as I was, just like you were with the way the season ended, I think the offseason is off to a good start. I think the two coordinators on both sides of the football bring a lot of experience. You went from Brian Johnson and Sean Desai, who had combined 1 year coordinator experience, to now 28 years of coordinator experience. Sign me up. I'll take it. Now, there's still a lot of questions with regard to the personnel on the defensive side of the football. And we'll continue to talk about that throughout the offseason. But the NFL did announce their compensatory picks. So this could help the Eagles if Howie Roseman can draft a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball. You've heard me on that soapbox before. But the NFL announced their list of compensatory picks, and they based that off of free agents you lost the year before. And the Philadelphia Eagles lost Javon Hargrave, Isaac Sayamala, Andre Dillard, TJ Edwards. And because of it, they got the best haul of compensatory picks. Philadelphia Eagles got a 3rd-round pick, which is huge, and 3 5th-round picks. So you got now going into this draft, which never too early to talk about the draft. Love the draft. They have their own 1st-round pick. They have 2 2nd-round picks because they still have the New Orleans Saints 2nd-round pick from that trade a couple years ago. They now have a compensatory pick in the 3rd round. They have 4 5th-round picks, and they have a 6th-round pick. So that was good news. So when I talk about, hey, this offseason starting out okay for the Eagles, so far so good. 2 experienced coordinators with a lot of success in this league. the biggest haul of compensatory picks. So things are going pretty good. But let's take a look real quick. And as we end every Legal Hands to the Face show, I'm going to hit you with a little trivia to end the show like we always do. Well, let's take a look at these championship games from yesterday. And we'll start with the first game of the day, the AFC Championship. The Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, and Andy Reid. How do we ever bet against these guys? Patrick Mahomes, like him or not, is probably the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. I know Tom Brady is still the GOAT with regard to championships. Mahomes is only 28 years old. 28 years old. And this is now his fourth Super Bowl. He's been to 6 AFC championship games. Every year he's been a starter. And every single season looks like, hey, maybe that team's not going to be as good this year. They figure out a way to get it done. Now, as good as Mahomes is, not taking anything away from him, the Ravens blew that game. Turnovers, undisciplined, bad penalties. As much as I would love to get up here and say, oh, the refs were giving Mahomes all the calls, every penalty they called on the Ravens was more than deserved. Undisciplined by the Baltimore Ravens. So Andy Reid gets back to another Super Bowl. And I did a video about this on my social media. Some of you guys may have already heard me talking about this, but every time Andy Reid gets back to the Super Bowl, or we always have to rehash the argument of whether or not they ever should have got rid of Andy Reid in Philadelphia. And I don't think that we should be rewriting history here. Because as great as Andy Reid is, may go down as the greatest coach of all time. When the Philadelphia Eagles got rid of him in 2012, it was time to go. He was coming off a 4-12 season. He had an 8-8 season the year before. He had been here for 14 years. He just had a personal tragedy during training camp with his son. It was time for both sides to move on. And let's face it, as good as Andy Reid is, because he is one of the greatest, he didn't win anything in Kansas City until maybe the greatest quarterback we've ever seen showed up in Patrick Mahomes. Now, you have to give Andy Reid credit. He identified Mahomes coming out of college. They made the trade to get him in the draft, and they developed him into being the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. Giving a lot of credit to Andy Reid on all of that. And Brett Veach, the GM in Kansas City, who was also here with the Philadelphia Eagles. But when the Philadelphia Eagles moved on from him, we cannot rewrite history here and go back with revisionist history. It was the right decision in 2012 to move on. And it worked out for Andy, obviously. And I'll tell you what, as much as I don't love seeing Andy Reid win and the Eagles not win, I'll be rooting for Big Red. I will be rooting for Big Red in 2 weeks at the Super Bowl for 2 reasons. One, I like to watch greatness. As much as I'm not a huge fan of Patrick Mahomes, I respect him. Just like I didn't love Tom Brady in the beginning of his career, I grew to respect him and root for him because there's something about watching greatness before your eyes. So I will be rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs because I root for greatness. But more importantly than that, because I can't stand the San Francisco 49ers. And I know all of you agree with me. You can't stand the 49ers either. And damn it, did they get lucky last night with Dan Campbell making 3 of the dumbest decisions. Frustrating as hell. And I see some Niners fans trolling in the chat. Lucky, man. Let's go back and look at some of these decisions by Dan Campbell. Because, look, hindsight is not 20/20 here. I tweeted it out during the game. And if you're not following me on Twitter, please do, at Bill Colarulo. Follow me on Twitter. engage with me, like hearing from my crew. But the Dallas, thank God we're not talking about the Dallas Cowboys. The Detroit Lions were up 17 points at the half. They come out in the second half. The San Francisco 49ers drive down the field, kick a field goal. It is now a 2-score game. The Detroit Lions have the ball at the San Francisco 49er 28-yard line. It's a 14-point game. It's 4th and 2. There's a difference between aggressiveness and recklessness. This was reckless. The risk-reward wasn't worth it. The reward that the Detroit Lions would have received, even if they convert that 4th and 2 and score a touchdown, wasn't worth the risk, and here's why. It's a 2-score game, a 14-point game. You kick a field goal, it becomes a 3-score game. You convert on 4th down and score a touchdown. Guess what? It's still a 3-point game. You gave all the momentum back to the San Francisco 49ers. You kept it as a 2-score game. Now, I would have been completely on board and said that that was just Dan Campbell staying true to himself if they were only up 3 or they were only up 10, where a field goal keeps it 1 score or 2 scores. So if they were up 10 at the time, you kick a field goal, it's still a 2-score game. I understand the aggressiveness. Some people have compared this, when the Eagles went for it with the Philly special, that was on 4th down. That touchdown on the Philly special was a aggressive, high-reward play because when they scored, it went from a 1-score game to a 2-score game. A field goal would have kept it a 1-score game. Do you understand the difference? That's why that move was not aggressive. It was reckless. Dan Campbell needed to make that a 3-score game. A touchdown, it's still only a 3-score game. But getting stopped completely changed the momentum, kept it as a 2-score game, and look what happened. That was mistake number 1. For me, that was the biggest mistake of the game. Then later in the 4th quarter, they're down by 3. They have the ball 4th and 3 at the San Francisco 49er 30-yard line. I actually had less problem with this. I would have kicked the field goal and tried to tie it. But I had less problem with this because, to me, this stayed true to who he was. Sure, you want to be aggressive because the difference between a field goal and a touchdown was a tie game or the Lions taking the lead. So for me, there was enough of a reward there that if you want to stay true to your aggressive nature, that you could do it. Not saying I agree with the decision, but that allowed him to stay true to his aggressiveness. But the first one didn't make any sense. And then the final horrible decision was running the ball on 3rd down at the goal line when you had all 3 timeouts left. Because once they stopped you, you had to use your timeout, and now you had to rely entirely on the onside kick. Dan Campbell is a CEO coach. What he's supposed to do as a CEO coach is make the decisions that help win you the game. He made 3 decisions that lost the game. If that was Philadelphia, we'd be losing our damn minds today. You guys know I was all for bringing Sirianni back after I let my emotions settle. If Sirianni would have done that, I may be standing in front of the NovaCare complex with a sign because that was ridiculous. And I don't like anybody say, he stayed true to his aggressive nature. No. You can be aggressive. I'm okay with being aggressive. You make that a 3-score game. Scoring a touchdown, the reward's not big enough. It's still a 3-score game. You couldn't risk giving the momentum back to San Francisco and keeping it a 2-score game, and that's exactly what happened. But, guys, we're going to do just an hour today, so that's the Legal Hands to the Face show, but I'm going to end it with some trivia like we do every single Legal Hands to the Face show. But make sure, like I tell you, make sure you are following me on all social media platforms because we're posting daily content about the Philadelphia Eagles. Make sure you're following me on Twitter and Instagram. You guys here on TikTok, make sure you're following me. I'll be back live tomorrow, 10 o'clock on the Philly Sports Power Hour. We do that every day from 10 to 11 on the JAKIB Sports Network. And then we'll be back on the Fanatic on Saturday and Sunday. But here's our trivia because we're talking some Andy Reid. Two-part question. There are 4 Eagles coaches. This is the easy one. There are 4 Eagles coaches to make it to a Super Bowl. Who are the 4 coaches in Philadelphia Eagles franchise history to make it to a Super Bowl? That's the easy one. And then I'll give you the harder question next. Who are the 4 Eagles coaches to make it to a Super Bowl? I'm looking at TikTok and YouTube to see if we're getting any comments here. 4 Eagles coaches that have made it to a Super Bowl. Nobody? This one's easy. Come on now. So the 4 Eagles coaches that have made it to a Super Bowl, obviously, there we go. Chwiz got it. Chwiz got it. I'm going to put it on the screen here on YouTube. Dick Vermeil, Andy Reid, Doug Peterson, and Nick Sirianni. But that was the easy question. Now here's the hard one. As good as Andy Reid was, Andy Reid is 3rd in franchise history with winning percentage. Who are the top 2 coaches in Philadelphia Eagles franchise history in terms of winning percentage? This is the harder question. Andy Reid's number 3 winning percentage in franchise history. Who are the top 2? Let's see if anybody gets this one. So I see people on TikTok giving us some answers. Transistors and trying. So Nick Sirianni, number 1 winning percentage. Now, obviously, a lot less games, but he has a .667 winning percentage. Andy Reid in franchise history, .583, but there's one more person ahead of him. I don't think anybody's going to get this one because you got to go all the way back to 1941 through 1950. So Nick Sirianni, number 1 winning percentage in franchise history at .667. Andy Reid, number 3 at .583. But at number 2, and this was the answer to a trivia question a couple of weeks ago as well, this name, Greasy Neal from 1941 to 1950, coached 111 games and finished with a winning percentage of .594. So you got Sirianni at number 1, Greasy Neal at number 2, and Big Red at number 3. Crazily, number 4 is Richie Kotite. I know Transistor Zen was kidding when he said Kotite as the Super Bowl coach, but Rich Kotite, number 4 in franchise history in terms of winning percentage. But guys, that's going to do it for the Legal Hands to the Face show. Again, make sure you're following me on social media. If you are listening to the audio on the podcast platform, please do me a favor. Leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening. Really helps us reach more Eagles fans. And make sure you're following us on all your favorite social media platforms. We'll be continuing to bring the daily content because there's so much to talk about with regard to this personnel. We didn't get into it today, but the list of potential free agents, there's a ton of them for this Philadelphia Eagles team. But there's also some guys who are still under contract that are entering the final years of their deal where their cap hit skyrockets. A little bit of a teaser. One of them is named Hassan Reddick. So unless they restructure that deal, I'm not sure Reddick's back next year, guys. So we're going to talk about all of that because there's going to be so many question marks with this Philadelphia Eagles football team. But hit that like button, hit that share button. Thank you for spending this hour with me. And as always, go Birds.
Go for the pulls and the pools. Go for the oohs and the ahs. Go for the bubbles and the bubbly. Go for the story and the stories. Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.